All right. Hello and welcome, everybody. I just started recording. This is Tim Duffy, your executive director of Electus Society. I'm so glad that those of you who are going to be joining live now and joining live in the future, and those who are going to watch this recording. So this is going to be a part two of our training, A Leader's Guide to Money in the Coming Financial Crisis. We did another one 2 weeks ago, which has been recorded and uploaded. So what we're going to do is with all of our leadership library series trainings, we're going to start off with a 2-minute grounded exercises, where a deep meditation to kind of set us up for success for this training. So let's play it right now. Feel free to turn off your cameras and we'll begin. Let's go.
Hello there, and welcome to this 2-minute meditation for grounding. Begin by sitting in a chair with your feet touching the floor. Relax your hands on your thighs with your palms facing upwards, and close your eyes. Begin to breathe slowly, in and out, noticing the feeling of how the air expands and contracts your belly and chest. Relax your body from head to toe and begin to imagine yourself in a beautiful, calming forest. Stay here and just admire the view, the trees, the sky, feeling the grass under your feet. Maybe it's autumn here and you feel the fallen leaves under your feet. As you stay here, relaxed and still, visualize how tiny roots begin to grow from the soles of your feet. These roots grow into the earth and make you feel grounded and secure. You now connect with Mother Nature's positive energy, making you feel so protected and loved. See how these roots begin to grow deeper and deeper into the earth, becoming thicker. Observe how you feel now, and when you feel ready, move your toes and fingers. Open your eyes and continue your day filled with centeredness, confidence, and compassion.
All right, namaste. So let's jump right into the training. Now, for those of you who have not seen the training part one, I highly recommend that you watch it. So we'll give you kind of a foundation for where we're going to go with this training. But just to kind of give you a little bit of recap, we had a big discussion on what is the state of the economy. And according to all these different experts, that I have been referencing, Jim Rickards, Steve Keen, Ray Dalio, we're in a stagnant economy right now. We have depressed growth. And where are we going to have a potential future financial and economic crisis? And in that video, I explained how those are two different things that you'll have to watch. And yes, we are going to have both of them because they've happened throughout history and they will continue to happen. It's just a natural part of capitalism, booms and bust, and greed. The other thing that we talked about is kind of where I got all this research from, which is those, economists and, financial experts. But then I actually said, you know what? Understanding the economy is so complex. You don't have to understand or take a 6-month course to understand the economy. I did. I took macroeconomics and microeconomics, and I still didn't really learn a lot because it's kind of confusing. So I just say there are just fundamental things that you need to know to understand the economies, from CPI, understanding what inflation is, deflation is, understanding, just some basic principles. And then the four reasons why leaders, since elected society is all about developing conscious leaders, why do leaders need to know about the economy, right? I wouldn't want to just bore you. Well, part of being a leader is to not have fear. And the way that we eliminate that fear is we're prepared for all the different possibilities. So all this training is about teaching you, hey, we could have what would happen in an inflation, what would happen in a deflation, all those other things, so that we can be prepared for all those possibilities. And if you or in the future you are ever in positions of leadership, having an impact on the economy, policy, you need to know what these things are, right, and what to do. And so we need to choose the best policies for economic growth and equality of opportunity. And we also need to understand and elect leaders that understand those best policies. And we have to avoid the left and the right bias, the liberal, progressive, conservative. We have to listen to all points of view in order to pick out the best policies. And then we talked about, there's a big formula that helps understand the economy, which is, money times the velocity equals GDP. And what people don't really realize is you can increase the money supply as much as you want, but velocity is all about psychology. If people are scared, then I don't care how much money the Fed prints, we're not going to have inflation, because people don't want to spend money because of their psychology and fear. So, governments are very afraid of having velocity go to zero. And they're also afraid of everybody getting so fearful that they have to spend the money because of hyperinflation that it would cause even more inflation. So it's something important to understand. And then Ray Dalio did a great video about understanding the economy that I shared in the last video training, where he says the most important thing to understand about the economy is credit, right? And if you don't have credit, you don't have an economy. And the Fed and the central bank adjust interest rates. They quote unquote print money. They don't really print money. They actually create credit. And that's what allows us to borrow money, buy mortgages, have a credit cards, etc. And that we through an economy, we go through all these cycles, booms and busts. But when credit gets too high, debt gets too high, then guess what? People can't pay back, so they have to sell assets, and then the cycle continues up and down, up and down, and up and down. And there's different ways that we could actually, deleverage, right? Which can lead to a deflation or recession. And there's all these different tools that governments do to try to keep that balance of let's not have too much inflation, let's not have deflation, let's just have it about right. So it could be spending cuts, debt restructuring, taxing and spending, printing more money, meaning printing more credit, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just kind of a very, very quick recap, but I do recommend that you watch that training. So the next thing is this training. What are we going to focus on? We're going to tackle a lot. I'm going to show you a lot of fun video clips that you're going to be able to learn a lot of different things. So the first thing is about money. What is money? Let's learn about the important characteristics. There's a term that you need to know. What's the difference between money and fiat currency, and how money is actually created? Most people think the Fed creates money, but it's not true. It's actually a bank. So I'm going to show you a video on how they do that. And then again, the when you listen to social media, you hear all about Bitcoin. For the younger generation, it's like it's the new currency. It's a form of cryptocurrency, and this is how we're going to generate wealth for the younger generation. Well, guess what? In these trainings, I want to give you different perspectives, and I want to hear both sides. In terms of Bitcoin, there are pros and cons to actually have Bitcoin, and so a lot of people don't really know about the dangers of Bitcoin. And so you're always hearing in the news on how amazing Bitcoin is. Well, I'm going to show you a video on some of the dangers of Bitcoin, according to Jim Rickards. Then I'm going to share with you some schools of economic theory. One of the things that you'll hear a lot about is MMT, modern monetary theory, right? I'm going to share with you some pros and cons about that. And then we'll conclude with the factors that really affect inflation and deflation and kind of preparing the future. So, what are all the different factors? Why is it so hard for economists to predict, hey, what is going to be GDP growth? Are we going to have inflation? Are we going to have deflation? It's so difficult because the economy is so complex and there's all these factors that are combining together that are going to cause inflation and deflation. So I'm not going to be able to go over all of them, but I will go over some of the major ones. And then again, let's finally conclude with how should you invest for the future? Again, I'm not an economist, I'm not a financial planner, but I want to share with you what the experts are saying. And just in case there's the worst case scenario that we ever have a nuclear type of event in the sense that we have a severe depression like we had in the 1930s. Well, what would we do? What would government do? Well, I'll tell you, according to Jim Rickards, what we can do and how we can instantly get inflation up if we're having a deflation event. So stay tuned for that. So again, big disclaimer, I'm not an economist. I'm not offering specific advice. I'm just sharing you this research. So I hope that by these trainings, what I've done is I've saved you so much time in collecting all this data so that you can watch it again, relearn, and so that you can adopt and understand it. So these were the individuals that I used to compile this research. So let's jump into money. So according to Jim Rickards, there's three characteristics of money. I always say money must be money, right? MUS. It's a medium of exchange, a unit of account of and a store of value. But what it really is trust and confidence, and it can be lost very quickly. So let me share this quick video. Okay.
Out of the air. I'm not trying to attract attention, content that will be useful to you. So my subject is the future of money. And I've
221.
kind of step back and say, what is money? Because everyone thinks they know what money is. I've got some money in my wallet. I've got some money in the bank. I would argue that your money in the bank is not your money, it's the bank's money, and they'll give it to you if they feel like it. But it's a big question, and the answer is all the things in this slide, whether it's feathers, shells, obviously gold, the euro, Bitcoin, other cryptocurrencies, silver, beads, digital money. These are all forms of money, every one of them. And one of the criticisms of certain forms of money is that it has no, there's nothing behind it. You know, people go, well, there's nothing behind the Canadian dollar, or there's nothing behind the US dollar, or one of the criticisms of Bitcoin. Why would I have Bitcoin? There's nothing behind it, et cetera. And I would submit that every one of these forms of money and others that are not here do have something behind them. In fact, they all have the same thing behind them. It's the only thing that matters, which is confidence. In other words, anything can be money. Many things have been money. The question is, do we have confidence that it's money? If I have it and I want to exchange it for goods and services, and I'm going to give it to you and you're going to provide some goods and services, are you confident that you can give it to someone else, that they'll accept it in exchange for goods and services you need? Or if you're holding on to it, are you confident that it will be money in the future to preserve your wealth? So the entire field of monetary economics, which would fill up a college or graduate or PhD curriculum, comes down to one thing. It's a confidence game. If we all think it's money, it's money. And if we don't, it isn't. And the problem with confidence, it's a very powerful thing, but it's psychological. It can be lost very easily. And once it's lost, it's impossible to regain. And so when you're thinking about money or how you want to allocate your portfolio or your preferred form of money, ask yourself this question: regardless of how it is viewed today, how comfortable am I that in the future, people will still have confidence in this as money? That's the most important question you can ask.
All right. So I love me some Jim Rickards. You know, I think he's great. Like I said in the last training, he's the economics professor I wish I had that I never did, but at least I got him through all these different videos. So now I'm going to show you another different video to understand the difference between money and fiat currency. So let's check this out. It's 3 minutes, quick video.
Printing presses, and the paper money rolls off the printing press.
Silver.
Here we go.
Difficult. It was still a guessing game when it came to the exchange of values. One of the reasons that we are in the financial mess that we are today globally is that people do not understand the difference between currency and money. Currency is a medium of exchange, a unit of account. It is portable, durable, divisible, and something called fungible. Fungible means that each unit is the same as the next unit. A dollar in my pocket buys the same amount as a dollar in your pocket. Money is all of those things plus a store of value over a long period of time. Even financial planners, bankers, your account, they don't understand the difference between currency and money. The currency in your pocket is a medium of exchange. It's a unit of account because it's got numbers on it. It's somewhat durable, it's portable, it's divisible in that you can make change, and it's fungible. A dollar in my pocket buys the same amount as a dollar in your pocket. But because governments can print more and more and more of it and dilute the currency supply, it's continually transferring wealth out of your pocket, out of your bank account to the government and to the banking system. The reason that gold and silver are the optimum form of money is because of their properties. It's an easy medium of exchange because gold and silver store a large amount of value in a very small area. It's a unit of account. Pure gold has the same value all over the planet. So an ounce of gold buys the same amount here in Egypt as it would in China or in the United States. It's durable. The same gold that Egyptians were using in trade 5,000 years ago is still here with us today. It does not corrode. It's divisible. You can make change with it. It's very portable. You could use something like oil as money. It's just that you can't carry around a barrel of oil on your back. It's fungible. Pure gold is the same wherever it is on Earth. Pure silver is the same wherever it is on Earth. It's limited in quantity. That's the reason that it maintains its purchasing power. Governments cannot print it. Over the last 5,000 years, only gold and silver have maintained their purchasing power. There have been thousands upon thousands of fiat currencies, currencies that are unbacked by gold or silver, and they have all gone to zero. It's a 100% failure rate.
Well, fiat
So that's the difference between really money and currency. And the idea of a fiat currency is just, it's not backed by anything because money used to be backed by gold. And it's just when the government says this is money. And so we're going to say it's money and we're the official entity that says it's money. So therefore it is. So Mike Maloney, he's really hardcore. He buys and sells, gold and silver. Again, to me, that kind of, colors his perspective, but he actually doesn't even refer to money. He always calls it currency. So again, I think that it's just very important to understand that concept. So now when you hear about how the Fed creates money, how does it really do that? Well, if you saw part one, it's the Fed doesn't really just print dollars. What it does, it actually creates credit. And so how do they do that? Well, they buy and sell treasury bonds. Okay. That's what we learned in part one of this training. And so if they want to expand the money supply or expand credit, what do? They basically have the Fed, which doesn't have any money, they could just write a check out of thin air. They will buy treasury bills from banks, right? In this scheme called the open market operation. And so once the Fed buys those treasury bills, that money is deposited in the banks and they have all these reserves. So now they have all this cash, in their deposits. And now that has an impact of lowering the federal funds rate. And so guess what that means? Banks can lend out even more and more money. On the opposite extreme, they can also have contractionary policies where the Fed, instead of buying treasury bills, they sell treasury bills. And so banks have to buy these treasury bills and bonds. And guess what? Now banks don't have a whole reserve of cash because they're buying all these treasury bills. And guess what happens? The Fed funds rate could increase from 1% 2%, 3%. So the outcome is they can't lend as much money. So again, this is a 2-minute video that I'll share this as an additional resource, but at least you got the idea of just the buying and selling of treasury bonds affects this market and affects how much cash banks have on reserve. Now, it's not the only tool that the Fed has. They have other tools too. And I'm going to share with you another video in case you guys want to go down this rabbit hole of how the Fed, what are all the tools? They have something called interest rates on reserves. Well, guess what? If the bank holds on to these treasury bonds, well, the Fed can give, from my understanding, forgive me because I'm still learning about this myself, they can almost give interest, so the bank's like, ooh, I'm collecting money on holding on to these, treasury bonds. And then, but also they have quantitative easing. So they don't have to be able to just increase the money supply by buying treasury bonds. They can actually target certain types of things like mortgages and other specific investment vehicles through quantitative easing, increasing the money supply for all different banks for a lot of different parts of the economy. And then there's another thing called reverse purchase agreements or reverse repo. Again, these are just ways of dealing with treasury bills and bonds. And again, I'm not going to go into the very, very technical aspect of how it is and how they manipulate it, but just know that the Fed has a bunch of tools to either expand the money supply or contract the money supply. And these are just three, but they have like 4, 5, 6, 8, 10. They have so many different tools because they're always trying to not have too much inflation and not have deflation. So that's what the thing that I really want you to understand. And then finally, I'm going to show you this video because Mike Maloney basically has a concept of how money is actually created. You think it's created a lot by the Fed? No, it's really the banks that create the most amount of money. So let's watch it from 620 to 940. And you'll hear all these terms. Steve Keen, that economist that I referenced before, he calls this double entry bookkeeping. In Mike Maloney's video, he calls it fractional reserve lending. they're the same things, but I'm just trying to teach you these different terms because they have different concepts. So let's watch this video. 940.
That's the
Ready? Let's go.
Now, massive amounts of currency spewing into society may at first sound like a fun idea. That is, until you remember one of the most important hidden secrets of money from episode 1, that the prices of everyday goods and services act as a sponge on an expanding currency supply. The more currency we have,
620.
the more price
Here we go.
pay in the banks. Now, this may come as a shock to you, but when you deposit your currency with the bank, you're not actually depositing it into an account to be safely held in trust for you. Instead, you're actually loaning the bank your currency, and within certain legal limits, they can do with it pretty much anything they please. This includes gambling in the stock market and loaning it out at a profit, of course. Now, this is where the machine of currency creation really gets cranky, because this is where something called fractional reserve lending comes into play. Fractional reserve lending is exactly what it says. The banks are allowed to reserve only a fraction of your deposit and loan the rest out. Although reserve ratios may vary, I'm going to use a 10% reserve ratio as our example. If you deposit $100 in your account, the bank can legally take $90 of it and loan it out without telling you. The bank must hold $10 of your deposit in reserve just in case you want some of it. These reserves are called vault cash. But why does your bank account still say you have $100 if the bank has stolen $90 of it? Because the bank left IOUs it created called bank credit in its place. Now, I know this sounds crazy, but here it is in black and white from the Fed. Commercial banks create checkbook money when they grant a loan simply by adding new deposit dollars in accounts on their books in exchange for a borrower's IOU. These are nothing but numbers that the banks type into their computers. And even though these bank credit IOU numbers are very different from base currency numbers, because they only exist in computers, they are still currency. So now there is $190 in existence. Now, the reason people take out loans from the banks is to buy something. They're going to buy a house or a car or something like that. So the borrower takes the $90 that the bank loaned him from your account, and he pays the seller of the item. But then the seller deposits that currency into his account, and his bank loans out 90% of that and leaves bank credit numbers in its place. So now there's $271 in existence. This process repeats and repeats until under a 10% reserve ratio. An initial deposit of just $100 can create up to $1,000 of bank credit, all backed by $100 of vault cash, just 10%. But as I said, reserve ratios vary wildly. On some deposits, it's 10%, on others, it's 3%, and on some forms of deposits, reserve requirements are 0. The result is that the expansion of the currency supply by the banks is far greater than even this example would lead you to believe. So once again, when currency is deposited in the banks get to lend it out, and then it gets redeposited and relent, redeposited and relent, redeposited and relent over and over again, creating bank credit all the way. This is where the vast majority of our currency supply comes from. In fact, 92 to 96% of all currency in existence is created not by the government, but here in the banking system. Now,
Wow. Pretty cool video, right? It really kind of demonstrates what's actually happening with the economy and how banks actually create money. So let's keep going for the sake of the training. Now, later in that video, what ends up happening is Mike Maloney actually says the Fed prints money, which causes inflation. And again, here's where these are subtle things, but I want you to really understand the difference. According to Jim Rickards and others, economists, that's not necessarily true. Okay, there was a very conservative economist, Milton Friedman, and he said this quote: inflation is always a monetary phenomenon. It's increased by the quantity of money, right? And what reality is like I've shared with you in this training, there's that M times velocity of money equals GDP, right? Well, what happens if the velocity is 0? So right now the Fed actually created a lot of credit right recently, from where it was to like the trillions and trillions of dollars, and we didn't see as much inflation over a period of couple of years. We're just starting to see a lot more inflation recently within the next year or two. But what the reality is, Fed expands the money supply and it potentially leads to inflation. But the banks are the ones that actually expand the money supply. And so economists and the Fed define inflation as the increase in price of goods and services. However, what we're starting to discover is when the Fed expands the money supply, it could actually lead to asset prices increasing, right? where why do you see the stock market rise every time the Fed has quantitative easing and expands the money supply? Because banks and other people have all this free cash and credit, and what are they going to do with it? They're going to buy assets. They're going to buy stocks. They're going to buy bonds, right? Hey, they may even buy Bitcoin, all these different, maybe even speculative assets. And so these go higher and higher and higher. But that's not how we define inflation. Inflation is really defined by the cost of goods and services. It does have an impact. But again, these are very subtle distinctions. But I'm just sharing with you the lessons that I've been learning from Jim Rickards and other economists just about these ideas. So I wanted to teach you them as well so that you can be more accurate when you're talking among the public and they say the Fed caused inflation. No, the Fed print money. Yes, that could lead to inflation, but there's other factors that can lead to inflation and deflation. All right. Now let's talk about the infamous Bitcoin, right? Everybody, if I have a bunch of friends who basically said Bitcoin is the future. It's all about the cryptocurrency. It's all about the blockchain. And some of you might say, Tim, I have no idea what the hell Bitcoin is. What is the blockchain? Is it a form of money? Is it currency? Well, again, Mike Maloney did a great video that kind of summarized what Bitcoin is and what the blockchain technology is all about. So I'm going to use this time to actually educate our Elective Society community about this. And so all that you need to know is Bitcoin was designed to have a limited amount of tokens, 21 million, right? It meant to be a trustless system, something you'll hear oftentimes called distributed ledger, right? That we have this method of validation, a proof of work, right? And so in this video, we'll learn how Bitcoin and blockchain works, and it's meant to solve this problem called the Byzantine problem, right? And so we're going to watch this video and understand what that is and kind of what this blockchain technology is. And then I'm going to show you a video of Jim Rickards criticizing Bitcoin and the dangers of it. Okay, just because I know there's so many videos out there and so many different speakers who are talking about Bitcoin, it's the future. But my job here is to educate all of you and maybe share some other perspectives that don't get as much attention. So let's watch this right now, 4 minutes to 8:32.
Different block to create, and
Here we go.
go right back to the beginning and learn how Bitcoin works. Like most people, at first I found the whole thing to be very abstract and complicated, but now I've found a way of breaking it down so that you don't have to be a rocket scientist to get it. I'm going to explain it by using an ancient problem that Bitcoin claims to have solved. It's called the Byzantine general's problem, and until now, it's been unsolvable. The problem goes like this. How do you make absolutely sure that multiple entities which are separated by distance are in absolute full agreement before an action is taken? In other words, how can individual parties find a way to guarantee full consensus? Here's the example. Imagine that you are a general in the Byzantine army and you're planning to attack an enemy city. You have the city surrounded by several battalions, each of them camped several miles from the other, and each of them led by another general. A coordinated attack on the city from all sides at the same time will be successful, but an uncoordinated attack will likely end in defeat. You have decided to attack at dawn, but you have no walkie-talkies or cell phones, and signals from flags, torches, or smoke could be seen by the enemy. How do you make sure with absolute certainty that all of the other generals reach consensus and all attack together at dawn? You could send messengers on horseback, but what if one of them is captured or killed before delivering the message? You would need to have a reply from each of your generals confirming that they have received your message, which means that they would have to send messengers to you on horseback, but what if they are captured or killed? What if a messenger is captured by the enemy and an imposter messenger with a fake reply is sent back to you? And how do the other generals know that the messages that they received from you are genuine and haven't been intercepted and altered by the enemy? Worse yet, what if some of the other generals are traitors and they send messages back to you confirming that they will attack at dawn when their true intention is to retreat? How can you ever be absolutely certain that all of your battalions will reach consensus and attack simultaneously? Like I said, this problem has remained unsolved for thousands of years, and at its core, it's all about individual parties being able to trust each other directly, no strings attached. Bitcoin claims to have conquered this problem. Now imagine that the battalions are actually computers on a network, and that the generals are copies of a computer program running a ledger. A ledger that, via some very complex math, records transactions and events in the exact order that they happened. The key here is that all of these ledgers are exactly the same for everyone. As soon as a change is made on one copy of a ledger, if it is proven to be true by the math, all other copies of the ledger are updated to match. What we have here is a distributed ledger that is also always in consensus. This is one of the first things to understand about Bitcoin. It is the first full consensus distributed ledger mankind has ever seen. This network can be expanded across the entire planet. It means that individual parties on opposite sides of the world can come to consensus on an event without requiring any third party as an intermediary for trust. Whether it's an order from a general to his troops or an order from you for a pizza, a distributed ledger confirms via math whether an event is true and records it permanently. Bitcoin, the first full consensus distributed ledger, is a trust machine. But is it 100% reliable? That's a question for later in the episode. But for now, where did Bitcoin come from and who invented it?
So it's going to go a little bit on some interviews about Satoshi Nakamoto invented this, but I really want to understand and explain blockchain technology a little bit more. So here, let's play it from here.
The electric motor or the radio
Here we go.
wide open, and no one is in control, and everyone can see exactly how it works.
So how does it work and what's the point? Cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin allow people to transact with each other using the internet anywhere on Earth. Instead of having an account number like a checking account or a credit card, cryptocurrencies are much more secure because they have a public key and a private key. It's like having two account numbers, one for deposits and another for withdrawals. You'll often see them displayed as a string of characters or a scannable code. This level of security means that you could put your public key on a billboard if you wanted to, and your funds would still be secure. The only thing other people can do with your public key is send funds to you. It's your private key that gives you access to your funds. As long as you keep control of your private key, your funds are absolutely safe and theft and fraud are virtually impossible. But just like cash in your wallet, you need to keep it safe to prevent it from being stolen. Its security is entirely your responsibility. Cryptocurrencies can also give you privacy. Just like cash, you don't have to disclose any personal information when you spend them. By contrast, a credit card has your name, account number, and expiration date. These act like a public key, but the equivalent of your private key, your signature and security code, are displayed in plain sight. This is just plain stupid. I've toured 5 national money museums, and while I was at one of them, I saw a group of young students on a school outing. I can just imagine that someday in the future, a group of kids will be standing around the credit card display, pointing and laughing at the incredible stupidity of the system we once used. And this is the point. Cryptocurrencies are light years ahead of our current technology. Since Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency, I'm going to use it as our example, and I'll expand on our earlier description of a distributed ledger. But first, where does Bitcoin get its value? Bitcoin is brand new to mankind in that it's both a currency and a payment network simultaneously. And this is where Bitcoin gets its value. The immense network of computers all around the world running the Bitcoin distributed ledger. Every second of every day, these computers are keeping the ledger updated and in full consensus via a system that incentivizes them to process and confirm transactions. The system that Bitcoin runs on is called blockchain. Think of it as a modern version of an old-fashioned bookkeeping ledger, but instead of a handwritten list of entries and calculations, a blockchain is a digital list of entries and calculations. A block is simply a bundle of transactions. Think of a block as a whole page of transactions in the old-fashioned ledger. A blockchain is just a chain of blocks. It's the same as a whole series of pages in the old-fashioned ledger. Easy, huh? Here's how it works. The Bitcoin blockchain actually exists in every one of the millions of computers on the network as exact copies of each other. However, for this example, so that we can zoom in and you can really see just how a blockchain works, I'm going to show it as one giant blockchain in the middle of a small network of computers. Let's follow a pizza transaction with Bitcoin. When the transaction occurs, it first appears on the network in a pool of unconfirmed transactions, along with thousands of others from all around the world. Millions of different computers from the network then gather some of these transactions and place them in their own blocks. The computers are all creating blocks constantly in the hope that theirs will be the next one added to the official chain. A new block is added to the chain every 10 minutes or so when one of the computers wins the right to have its block recognized as the next in the chain and is rewarded with a prize of newly created Bitcoins. The way a computer wins the prize is by trying to guess the answer to an extremely difficult math problem. In fact, the problem is so difficult that even with millions of computers making guesses billions or even trillions of times per second, it still takes roughly 10 minutes to find the answer. Once one of the computers guesses the correct answer and wins, all of the millions of computers on the network that did not win are instructed to throw away all the work they have done, update their ledgers with the block from the winning computer, and start again with a new math problem. In doing so, the computers use an immense amount of power and cost a literal fortune to run. So why do they do it? Because it can be very profitable. This is where the term mining for bitcoins comes from. Instead of striking gold by mining for precious metals in the wilderness, these computers are hoping to strike Bitcoin by mining precious numbers on the blockchain. But when these millions of computers are selecting transactions to go into their blocks, they aren't all selecting the same transactions, and not all the blocks are the same size. Some contain more transactions, some contain less. When blocks are thrown away, the transactions they contain go back into the pool of unconfirmed transactions. This means that the probability of a transaction being confirmed and staying in the order it was confirmed in is not absolute, but it becomes more of a certainty every 10 minutes as new blocks are added. In fact, for very large transactions, it's suggested that you wait for 6 or more blocks, about 60 minutes, to be absolutely certain that a payment is permanent. So why is it so slow? Why is your pizza cold before you own it? Interestingly, the system is slowed down on purpose, and here's why. With the insane difficulty of guessing the answer to the math problem, you would think that the odds of 2 or more computers winning at the same time are extremely improbable, but it actually happens quite often. This is called a soft fork, and when it occurs, all the computers in the network receive both of the winning blocks and are instructed to create a new block that will chain to the block they received first. But because of varying internet connection speeds, different computers receive different winning blocks at different times. The tie is broken roughly 10 minutes later when one of the computers solves the new math problem and its block is added to the ledger, and the longest chain wins. But what happens to all of the blocks on the other side of the fork? They're discarded, along with all the transactions they contained, which go back into the pool of unconfirmed transactions. This soft forking is the main reason the system must be slowed down on purpose via the math problem. If the system was instant, it would be forking everywhere, all the time, and there would be no consensus. No one would have any idea of which ledger was the correct one, and every computer would be busy building a different block to create yet another fork. The slowness and immense amount of computing power is required to keep the Bitcoin ledger in full consensus. Therefore, as more and more computing power is added to the network, the system automatically adjusts to increase the difficulty of solving the math problem, which then requires even more power. If Bitcoin is ever going to be widely used, it will be using a massive amount of the world's energy. There are other systems for reaching consensus, but we'll look at those later in the episode.
So that was a great description on Bitcoin. And so I think it really does a good job to say, understanding blockchain, understanding distributed ledger, the value of it. But as you can start to see, I think we're starting to, even Mike Maloney is kind of pointing out some holes, like this whole idea of forking and it doesn't, does it, it claims to solve the Byzantine problem, does it, but it does it really? It's kind of clunky. Again, it was the first technology out there like this that I understand. And so therefore, that's why one of the reasons why it's so popular. But there are new systems that may be even better. But now I'm going to show you a video by Jim Rickards, and basically he's going to critique Bitcoin, and he says that he did a deep analysis and studied it, and it's very interesting that what he says. Bitcoin is not digital gold, it is a cryptocurrency, and the important thing that you all need to understand is all cryptocurrencies are not the same because they all have different validation methods, and he outlines 5 challenges to Bitcoin. It's not really scalable, it's not sustainable, it's not regulated, there's not really a lot of use cases unless you're talking about criminals and tax evaders. I've only seen one so far really good case for Bitcoin. If you live in a country that there's like hyperinflation or there's and you have your assets and money and you want to escape the country, again, you can transfer your money to Bitcoin, memorize a 12 keyword password, travel across the border. Are you carrying any money? No. And then they can come to America and transfer on an exchange Bitcoin back to US dollars, and they could maybe preserve their wealth. Those are some instances, but those are very isolated in different countries. But guess what? Jim Rickards is right. What are those people trying to do? They're trying to avoid the government. They're trying to avoid taxation or to be penalized by it. It's not elastic and it's subject to manipulation. I have never heard from anybody that I've been listening to like things interviews about Bitcoin for years, And Jim Rickards is the only person to talk about how much Bitcoin is manipulated. And there was a speaker by the name of Mike Green, who's not a speaker, he's actually an investor. And he basically said, what is Bitcoin? It's people are buying it based on the perceived value that it's going to go up and up and in value. So for example, right now it's basically selling for $60,000, per whatever token or coin or for every Bitcoin. And guess what happens? If I'm a person that says, yes, I really want to buy Bitcoin, what does that mean? I have to buy it from somebody else who owns Bitcoin. So I say to that owner, hey, please, can you sell me your Bitcoin? It's $60,000. Guess what they're going to say? No, I'm holding on to this because I want it to value. Come on, let me give you 70,000. No, let me give you 80,000. No, come on, give me 90,000. Let me buy a Bitcoin. Okay, fine, I'll sell it to you for 90,000. Right? So you can see that people, according to Jim Rickards, 40% of the people, 1,000 people own 40% of Bitcoin, so they can really manipulate the whole idea of buying and selling Bitcoin. And it's called painting the tape, where people will basically say, you know what, will drive up the price. And so you can see how it's a speculative bubble, all hoping that it's going to gain up value. But just guess what happens? The opposite can be true. What if there is suddenly the trust is lost in Bitcoin, as he's going to share in this video? It is a danger of being manipulated heavily, even by governments, engaging in currency wars and things like that, stealing Bitcoin and things like that. Well, guess what happens? What if I'm afraid about my Bitcoin and I'm going to lose all its value? And I'm like, here, I have $60,000 worth of Bitcoin. Sell it. I need my money back. I need my cash. And what if nobody wants to buy it? Come on, give it to me for 50,000. No. Come on, give it to me for 40,000. No. So do you see how it's all based on people willing to buy it and sell it? So, and then the other thing that he says in this video that I think is very interesting is people who created Bitcoin, they're not, monetary experts. Jim Rickards has studied monetary history. The thing that makes money is that, especially the US dollar, is that it has a bond market. People borrow that money or store their money in bonds so that it gets interest. There is no market. There's no bond market for Bitcoin. And if everyone's hoping that the value of Bitcoin goes up and up, well, if I'm going to borrow on Bitcoin and then I have to pay that person back, wouldn't it be terrible if the Bitcoin actually raised up in value and so I have to pay back Bitcoin that's actually worth a lot more? Like, that doesn't make any sense. People don't want to borrow on a currency that's going to be worth more on a speculative bubble and have to pay it back. So again, I don't think you hear about these different ideas. So let me share some of this video, which I think is very, very insightful. All right, 1625 to 33.
It's lost.
All right, 1625. Here we go.
About crypto, everyone's favorite topic. My least favorite topic, I believe me, I spend a lot of time on it. I study it. I read all these white papers. I read peer-reviewed scientific papers. I grind my way through the equations, but it's painful. But but everyone wants to talk about it, so let's jump in. First of all, there's no such thing as cryptocurrency. There are 1,000 cryptocurrencies. In other words, you cannot speak generically about cryptocurrencies. Jim Rickards hates cryptocurrencies. That's not true. I really, really dislike Bitcoin, and I'll tell you why. But there are cryptocurrencies out there that I think are very interesting and worth your consideration. I'm for it. I'm against it. Cryptocurrency means nothing. You have to talk about the specific currency. And I'm here. I'm showing a Bitcoin, Litecoin, Monero, and Ether. By the way, isn't it fascinating how the graphical representation of cryptocurrencies is always a gold or silver coin? Bitcoin's gold and Litecoin's silver, Monero is both, and Ether is gold. And what are they trying to say? I think that psychologically what they're saying is, well, this is nothing, but if we pretend it's a gold coin, then someone will buy it. But I just find this a little bit of an aside. But no, it's the same thing is true with fiat currencies. You can't be like or dislike fiat currencies generically. Some people do because they just hate central banks. I understand that, but it's a big difference between a Venezuela Bolivar and a euro. Big difference between a Zimbabwe dollar and a US dollar. So in other words, don't talk to me about cryptocurrencies. Tell me what specific one you want to talk about, and that's a more interesting conversation. I think it's really important because this field is so muddied. The conversation is so muddied. People not distinguishing between blockchain and currency, not distinguishing between different types of currencies, et cetera. I think we need to step back, take a deep breath, and be rigorous in our analysis and think about what we're actually talking about. There's no such thing as a blockchain. There are hundreds of blockchains. In other words, every currency, every token, every so-called smart contract, if you're using Ether, has a different blockchain. So there are at least hundreds, perhaps thousands of blockchains, new ones being created every day. So again, don't talk to me about blockchain. Tell me which specific blockchain you're talking about, because they're not all the same. And this is critical. The main difference, there are many differences in this blockchain technology, but the main difference is validation. Because remember, the whole idea of cryptocurrencies and blockchain and the original Bitcoin and what Satoshi Nakamoto came up with is that we're going to have a trustless system. We're not going to trust banks. We're not going to trust clearinghouses. We're not going to trust exchanges. We're not going to trust central banks. We're not going to trust anybody. We're going to have a decentralized system that a community can validate, and we don't have to rely on anybody in particular. That was the original idea. So the question is, what's your method of validation? And that's what distinguishes one blockchain from the other. So I've listed 4 of them here, but there are others. Proof of work, that's what blockchain uses. And you know what the work is? You got to like factor these, 87-digit prime numbers into prime factors. It's a lot of computer crunching, completely clunky, completely inefficient, non-sustainable. I'll talk about that in a second, but that's Bitcoin. There's something else called proof of stake, meaning you actually, this is what Ether is based on. You demonstrate that you have a certain percentage of the processing power. So you step up based on your stake. There's proof of space. Space is storage space on a hard drive. So I get to vote on the blockchain. I get to vote on validating the blockchain because I've decided to devote a certain amount of my hard drive to that process. There's a new coin called Spacemint. And then there's the Byzantine agreement. There's a version of that called the Federated Byzantine Agreement, which I personally think is the best. Much more robust to some of the problems we're talking about, and there are others. But the point is, don't talk about blockchain. Say, okay, what's your governance model? What's your validation model, et cetera? And then ask yourself, is that sustainable? Is that robust? Will that resist an attack? Are your cryptocurrencies going to be stolen? These are the questions you have to ask yourself, and there are no generic answers. So I cannot emphasize enough. Coin by coin, I hate to use the word coin, whatever, token by token, blockchain by blockchain, be rigorous and ask yourself what's sustainable. Now, Bitcoin, Ripple, and Ether, and some of these other cryptocurrencies, not all of them, but the best known are going to fail. When I say fail, they're going to, Bitcoin might have a $200 value as a token for criminals, and the criminals and terrorists might find a use case at about $200 per Bitcoin, but they're basically not going to be anywhere near where they are today. Why do I say that? I don't want to make a claim without backing it up. The first point is they're non-scalable. Transaction times are slow. And then when you say that to Bitcoin people, they go, aha, the Lightning Network is right around the corner. Lightning's going to, we'll see. They said that about segregated witness. They said that about some of these other solutions. They don't seem to get community support. They keep forking the Bitcoin, meaning one day you wake up and there's 2 blockchains instead of 1, or whatever happened to that whole idea that we weren't going to have inflation and we weren't going to pull new cryptos out of thin air. But these solutions, you have to understand what the solution is. So what they're saying is nobody has a solution for the inherent slowness, clunkiness, non-scalability of the original Bitcoin blockchain. There's no solution for that. So when you hear about solutions, what are they? Well, what they're saying is take a bunch of transactions offline. So everybody in the room could form a group, or let's say every coffee shop in Brooklyn, New York, every coffee shop in Vancouver could form a group. And all the people who want to buy a coffee would join that group. And we would agree, so we're in our own little bubble over here, and we would agree that all of our Bitcoin transactions among each other don't go on the blockchain. They just get settled in this sort of separate cloud over here. And then we net them out. So, I pay you 5 Bitcoin and you pay the person next to you 4, and he pays the lady in the back of the room 10, and she pays me 7, and we net it out. And then periodically, and it could be daily, weekly, monthly, or whatever, we net all this stuff out. And then we take that net and we put that on the blockchain so that the amount of transactions that have to go on the blockchain is greatly reduced. That's true. But what are we doing? We've created our own network. I got to trust the coffee shops. How do I know they're not going to steal my money? In other words, it's only a solution because you're completely negating the original idea. Oh, sure. If you want to tear up the original idea and start over, that's fine. But don't tell me you're adhering to the idea of a decentralized trustless network, because you're not. All you've done is create another network. Somebody, I get trolled on Twitter all the time. People tell me I'm an idiot and I don't know technology and all that stuff. And then my more sour modes, I tell them I was coding before they were born. But as far as some of these things are concerned, somebody said, well, you don't understand payment channels. And I actually do. And I said, yeah, I understand payment channels. We had those in the 50s. They were called party lines, which is, you pick up the phone and someone's talking, you got to ask them to get off the phone. So you could go, no, there was an AT&T network, at least in the United States, but other people could jump in on this little side thing. That's all it is. These are party lines. So that doesn't work. Non-sustainable. The energy usage to solve the problem and make the proof of work in Bitcoin is now greater than the annual energy output of Ireland. Imagine taking all the electricity used in Ireland in a year, and that's how much we have to use to crunch numbers. By the way, every applied mathematician will tell you that prime factoring is a trivial problem. It's like an uninteresting problem. But it takes a lot of computing power to do it because the numbers are so big and the possibilities are so great. So we're just wasting the entire electrical usage of Ireland. In a few years, it's going to be the entire electrical usage of Japan. Who in this room thinks that governments are going to allow Bitcoin miners to use as much electricity in a year as the entire country of Japan, the third largest economy in the world? That's not going to happen. It's it's not going to happen. It's not very green. It's completely wasteful. In other words, it can't happen. So that's why I say it's not sustainable. It's going to hit a wall. Non-regulated, I don't have to remind you of all the frauds, new ones popping up every day. It's not just exchanges. How do exchanges work? I want to go to a Bitcoin exchange. Well, you got to go and you got to open an account, just like Merrill Lynch or Charles Schwab, right? So, or China Dominion. So you give me your name, your address, your social security number, your bank wire information, give them all that information, and then send them dollars. And they say, okay, you got some Bitcoin. Here's your confirmation. Really? How do I know you didn't just take my dollars and send me a phony baloney confirmation? How do I know you're not, a Ponzi? You're using new money to pay off the old money. How do I know you're not Bernie Madoff with a computer engineering degree? How do I know you're not a bucket shop? How do I know any of those things? The answer is you don't. So good luck with that. Not to mention Bitcoin whales. They estimate there are 1,000 people who control 40% of the Bitcoin. Now you got millennials buying, 1/100th of a Bitcoin for, $10 or whatever the math is, $100. But you got these, I call them the whales, these 1,000 people who have 40% of all the Bitcoin. You don't think they have a big vested interest in keeping the price up? And you don't think they wash trade, do wash sales? So A sells to B for 10,000, B sells back for 11,000, A sells back for 12,000, B sells back for 13,000. This is called painting the tape. It's the oldest trick in the book. And there's no profit and loss because we're selling the same Bitcoin back and forth. But what we are doing is creating a ticker that gets the millennials, I shouldn't pick up millennials, the pre-millennial children, but gets people all over the world, maybe a garage mechanic in South Korea took out a home equity loan or hocked his inventory, put his entire life savings into Bitcoin and has now been wiped out and is desperate and suicidal. That's what's going on. It's basically rich people stealing from the poor, not a good business model in my view. And then finally, there's no use case other than criminals, terrorists, or tax evaders. Why is Bitcoin better than Visa? Unless you're a criminal. Now, if you're a criminal, I get it. If you're buying child pornography, you want to use the dark web and use some cryptos and all that. If you try doing that with Visa, you'll probably get a call from the FBI. So I understand why it's good for criminals. But if you're not a criminal, if you're not a tax evader, if you're not buying child pornography, if you're not an arms dealer, if you're not a terrorist, then why is Bitcoin better than Visa? Anybody? Yes. Well, Visa is very convenient if you ask me, but the point is, there's really no use case for it other than crime. And then it's not elastic. And this is important because there's a finite number of Bitcoins, 21 million Bitcoin. They're getting closer to that level every day. And everyone's like, this is a good thing because, the problem with central banks is they print all this money and we're going to have inflation. By the way, we haven't had any inflation for the last 8 years. Separate issue. I'll come to that if we don't run out of time. But, we hate central banks. They print too much money, blah, blah, blah. So we're going to cap the number of Bitcoin, but money supply has to be elastic. It can't be too elastic. The problem with central bank money is that it's too elastic, The reason, by the way, gold is such a good form of money is that it grows slowly. It grows at about the tempo of world growth. It grows at about the tempo of population growth. Not exactly, but close enough that it's the best form of money anyone's ever discovered. But pardon me. But the problem with Bitcoin, when you hit a hard stop, which they will, and the economy keeps growing, but you want to back it with Bitcoin. So here's your money supply and here's your economy. That's inherently deflationary, right? Because each Bitcoin's got to support more and more growth, meaning your Bitcoin is worth more in theory. But the problem is you never get there. Why? Because if you have a deflationary currency, there's no bond market. The money supply grows based on credit, based on loans, based on various forms of borrowing. The money supply is just a foundation, and the economy grows with credit. Nobody wants to borrow in a form of money that's going to be more expensive when you pay it back. I'm not talking about interest. That's always part of the equation. I'm saying the money itself is worth more when you have to pay back the loan. No one's going to borrow on that loan. Therefore, no bond market. Therefore, no viable form of money. So these are all the reasons why this is going to hit the wall. How do you find? I said there were some good cryptos out there. How do you distinguish between the two? I've come up with I researched this for a long time and came up with a 5-factor function. I call it COIN. That's just, you come up with these acronyms so people can kind of relate to it. But it stands for the following. C is for consensus. This goes back to the validation method I talked about earlier, meaning the best validation method, these Byzantine agreements that I described. What you do is you let white hats, you let good guys into the validation world, even if they don't have a stake or that much processing power, but they get to kind of vote, and everybody looks at everybody else. The way this works, it's kind of like how do you get a search result on Google? I mean, what was Larry Page and Sergey Brin's insight that led to Google? Maybe the most valuable company in the world almost. Well, it was let people decide. In other words, Our search engine is going to show the result that the most people who have ever asked the same question decided it was a good result for them. That's all it is. So maybe start out, it's a little bit inefficient, but after a million searches or 10 million searches, if the overwhelming majority of people said, this is the answer, I had a question, here's the answer, and you go to Google, that's the link you're going to get. All they do is let the community, through their own actions, through their own validation, decide what's the best answer. Well, there are ways of doing that to validate the blockchain, including people who are not miners. Open source just means that the code is available and anyone can participate. This would distinguish it from what's called a permissioned system, like FedCoin, if the Federal Reserve had a crypto, or IMF or others. Impenetrable just means it's robust to attack. If 51% of the miners, if 51% of the Bitcoin miners came up with a block that said they owned all the Bitcoin and they took all your Bitcoin and they validated it, they would have the Bitcoin. It's irreversible. You have no recourse. And now the theory, Nakamoto's theory, was that, well, that'll never happen because that's an awful lot of processing power. But again, he wasn't really thinking like a geopolitical strategist. What if you're Russia and you said, I'm going to spend $50 billion to create 51% of the mining capacity in the world, and I'm going to steal all the Bitcoin in the world and take down the Western financial system. In other words, that's a kind of financial warfare, but warfare is not free. That's the point. Warfare is not free. And so spending $50 billion to get the processing power to destroy Bitcoin might be a smart move relative to building 10 aircraft carriers, which would also cost you $50 billion. In other words, it's not, and so much of the mining power is concentrated in China right now. Chinese government, these are communists. It's a communist dictatorship. There's no recourse. They could take over those miners tomorrow. So the idea that you can't aggregate 51% of the mining power is just not true. And there are other kinds of attacks. So you want a coin that's not vulnerable to those, what they call the 51% miner attack. No nonsense governance. That's what I was talking about earlier. You don't want this clunky proof of work, and nimble, fast, easy use. If you're not faster than Visa, if you're not faster than PayPal, if it costs you $60 to do a $50 Bitcoin transaction, so you got to pay them 10 to make your money go away. That's how it works today. Well, that's not competing with anything, and that has no future.
Very interesting. Again, I really wanted to show you that video because that is not a message that I typically hear, from different experts about Bitcoin, right? Jim Rickards is and you can very much tell that he knows what he's talking about. He's actually saying there are examples of where a cryptocurrency can work. Use these methods to determine if it's actually very valuable, right? And so I don't think he's just a curmudgeon saying, no, poo-poo this. He's really pointing holes. And I think it's very good for us to actually hear that perspective that I don't think that's often mentioned very much. So now let's go into the part two, which is the idea of different economic theories, modern monetary theory, which is something that's very popular. So what is economics? Economics is the study of how people allocate scarce resources for both production, distribution, and consumption. And you can both do it on an individual level and as a collective group of people. Now, again, if you went to college like I did, and you could take courses in microeconomics having to do with the individual, macroeconomics having to do, with the economy as a whole. But what you start to discover, and this is what I really learned from Steve Keen, and again, I'm going to share with you, there's a video that he did with Lex Friedman of this podcast that kind of described the whole history of all these different schools of economic theory, right? But here's what I wanted to go back. I just want you, we don't have enough time to go through each one of these different schools and what they think. But what I want you to take away from this is, oh my goodness, look at all these different, throughout history, all of these different perspectives trying to understand how people and the economy works. From physiocrats to classical, that was Adam Smith, Karl Marx, neoclassical. This neoclassical, this is what we traditionally learn in economic schools right now, like in colleges, that they're teaching these textbooks, neoclassical economics. However, there's also an Austrian school. There's a Keynesian school by this guy named John Maynard Keynes. He really influenced economics tremendously, right? And then there is also the Chicago School of Economics. But out of all of these different theories, the most important one that I want you to know about is modern monetary theory. And one of the advocates of it is this woman by the name of Steffi Kelton, and we'll talk about it. But let me just share with you what Steve Keen's perspective is. Neoclassical economics are all striving to have a stability and equilibrium in an economy. But if you saw part one of our training all about Ray Dalio, you know that that is completely wrong. the economy, a capitalist economy, is subject to booms and busts, right? The economists don't understand, according to Stephen Keen, how money is created and how the economy actually works. He says that Stephanie Kelton, who we're going to talk about right now, is accurate in the sense that she has a closer understanding of how money is created with modern monetary theory. He still says that there's some holes in it, right? But the economy is a complex, dynamic system, right? And that's why it's so difficult for people to make accurate predictions. So, what does Stephanie Kelton and modern monetary theorists say? Well, she's contributed to this work. She says that we're not on a gold standard anymore. Okay, so guess what? Deficits, you mean when the federal government spends money on the people, it's a good thing, right? It's good for the economy. You can't apply the government and think of them as a household. Hey, we shouldn't spend more than what money we have coming in. Why? Is because we can keep raising the debt ceiling. The Fed can keep buying treasury bills. We can actually create money. We can expand credit. And guess what? The government can have unlimited deficits because we create our own money. That's why it's not a household. She just says, hey, just be careful from inflation, right? And the proof of how this works is when we had the 2020 COVID crisis, we had the shortest recession in history because guess what? The Fed did quantitative easing and created trillions and trillions of dollars in credit to help juice the economic system, to have banks and stuff to start lending out. And guess what happened? We created more money than we did since the whole history of the United States, right? So they're claiming that as a victory. So I'm going to show you another video from Jim Rickards on his perspective. But this is Stephanie Kelton's video. So let me share with you. That's kind of her thesis. But what I want to show you is what Jim Rickards says. Actually, you know what? Let me show you this quick little video. Let's do it.
Contributed to the body of academic scholarship known as MMT, or modern monetary theory. MMT provides an accurate description of how a fiat currency, like the US dollar or the British pound, actually works. It reminds us that we're no longer on a gold standard, so finding the money to pay for the things we need is never an issue for countries like the US or the UK. If we're going to fix what's broken in our economy, we have to fix the way we think about the limits on government spending. Let me give you an example of the kind of broken gold standard thinking that still permeates our discourse. Back in 1983, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Margaret Thatcher, said these words: "If the state wishes to spend more, it can do so only by borrowing your savings or by taxing you more. And it is no good thinking that someone else will pay. That someone else is you. There is no such thing as public money. There is only taxpayers' money." Maybe you've heard the contemporary version of Thatcher's dictum: there is no magic money tree. It's just another way of saying that everything must be paid for and that the taxpayer is ultimately on the hook for whatever the government spends. It sounds worrying. As individuals, we know that when we borrow money to go to college, start a business, or buy a home, we're personally saddled with that debt. We have to find the money to pay it back. Taking on too much personal debt can lead to all sorts of problems. Even small businesses and large corporations have to walk a fine line when it comes to debt. But the federal government is fundamentally different. Word: deficits. We've all been conditioned to worry about deficits. So lawmakers are looking for ways to spend more without adding to the deficit. And that's what this whole pay-for game is about. Unfortunately, deficits have gotten a bad rap. They're almost always seen in a negative light. And I would like to change that. When we hear the word deficit, we probably think of a deficiency or shortfall. Okay, a deficit always sounds ominous. So when we hear that the federal government just ran a $3 trillion budget deficit, it can sound worrying. And it can even anger people. But there's another way to think about government deficits. Just as a 6 becomes a 9 when we view it from a different angle, a government deficit becomes a financial surplus when we look at it from another perspective. A deficit hawk might look at this picture and see nothing but a sea of worrying red ink. That's not how I look at it. Here's what I see. I see what's happening on the other side of the government's ledger. When the government spends more than it taxes away from us, it makes a financial contribution to some other part of the economy. Their red ink is our black ink. When you look at it this way, it becomes clear that every deficit is good for someone. The question is, for whom? And what are those deficits being used to accomplish?
Okay. Well, I could keep showing more of Stephanie Kelton, but here's what I would like to show with you. There's actually a fun clip of of Jackie Mason. He's this comedian, but for the sake of time, I'll send it as an additional resource. Reagan basically did something which was quite incredible. He decided to decrease taxes, right, which mean they had less money to spend, and he increased deficits, and he spent much more money than they really had, increasing the deficit tremendously. And so they credit him and that policy as helping to defeat the USSR. But again, economists debate that or whatever it might be. But there is a valid point that we have the ability to spend money because we can actually print and create our own money, and because the U.S. Has our treasury bond market. We are the world's reserve currency, so we have this ability to do this, and we're very fortunate. But here's what I wanted to show you: Jim Rickards. Who I really like in the sense that he can understand both perspectives. He's able to just say, listen, I think Stephanie Kelton is right. It is true that the Fed can print money, a lots amount of money, right? It is true that the Treasury can issue unlimited debt, right? Because as long as Congress raises the debt ceilings. But Stephanie Kelton says the bond market is a favor to investors. And we can just sidestep that whole bond market and just send money to anywhere we want to it, right? And Jim Rickards says she's right, but it's really dangerous. And why does he say that's dangerous? Is because it goes back to the original theory about money. Money is all based on confidence. How would you feel, about you being an investor and putting your money and it's being devalued because it's being spent on all these different ways, right? And again, he says it can be easily lost. And right now, as I mentioned in part 1 of the training, US is the world reserve currency, meaning all these different countries, they store their money by buying US Treasury bonds. Well, guess what happened in Russia, right? We decided to say, you know what? We don't like you, Russia, what you're doing. All your bonds and all these different payments, we're not going to pay you, right? Because these are US Treasury bonds. And so they just froze them, right? So you can't sell them, all right? You're not going to get the money. And we can do that. And so guess what that means for a lot of other countries? That means that people are going to be scared to say, well, am I going to be next? Are they going to do this? So you start to erode the confidence. So what does that mean? Less people want to buy US Treasury bonds, right? And again, I'm going to send this as an additional resource. There was a big debate, and this is several hours long, and I'll send it to you guys if those who are interested in going down the rabbit hole. But there are already, this big debate was not whether the US is going to lose its world reserve currency status, because there's a payment currency and there's a reserve currency. Reserve currency is where you hold your money, usually in treasury bonds. Payment currency is what we use to transact. So most of the world holds US Treasury bonds as a reserve currency to store their money because they wanted to grow in interest, right? But other countries are realizing how the United States is weaponizing the dollar. And guess what? They don't trust the US anymore. We're printing so much money, we're inflating the money. And guess what's going to mean? The value of the money is going to be decreasing. So they're finding alternatives. And in this big debate, they actually say, well, you know what? It's not a debate whether we're going to lose world reserve currency. It's about the timeline of when we'll lose world reserve currency, and that these countries are already developing and trying to find an alternative system. And Jim Rickards is the one person who I've heard has pointed out, guess what? Central banks around the world are buying gold. right? Because they realize that, all these countries are printing inflation, printing money, right? They're not, excuse me, I'm using that incorrectly. They have the potential to create hyperinflation by printing all this money, and so they want to have a store of value. And so knowing that a country can have reserves of gold is helping them to preserve that store of value. So very interesting debate. For those who are really interested, I highly recommend that you watch that training. So let's conclude the training on this final part 3. And why is it so hard for economists and others to decide and figure out, well, are we going to have inflation or are we going to have deflation? Why is it that the Fed, right, the central bank of the United States, makes predictions all the time? Oh, this is what our GDP is going to be. This is what our inflation is going to be. We're going to adjust our monetary policy. We're going to reduce rates. And so that's going to bring down inflation. And guess what happens? They do it, they reduce rates or they increase rates. And guess what? Inflation's still here. It's like, wait, what happened? Their predictions are oftentimes wrong, right? And then they have to readjust and then, okay, let's go back to the drawing board. Let's keep monitoring. It's so difficult to determine where the economy is going and whether we're going to have inflation or deflation, because guess what? The economy is a complex dynamic system. So here is what Jim Rickards and others basically say. What are all the different factors that can affect the economy? And that could actually be inflationary pressures, and it could be deflationary pressures, right? Just the idea of supply and demand. The first one to realize is that that's the big elephant room is demographics. What does that mean? It means your population and your characteristics. So if you are a family and you start having all these kids, right? Do you think that you're going to buy more goods and services? Absolutely. So guess what happens? Buying more goods and services. That has an inflationary impact. But guess what? What if your population decides not to have a lot of kids? What if your population, is ends up being mostly of senior citizens? Is that going to be inflationary, deflation? Well, deflationary, because maybe senior citizens and others, they don't want to spend as much money, right? They don't have diapers to buy, shopping. They're not going to. They just have maybe less needs. So do you see how the population and demographics of a country can affect the GDP, but also can affect inflation and deflation? The next big factor is debt payments. This is what a lot of the people, including Jim Rickards, Steve King and others, worry about is, hey, if how do we actually create inflation? Right. Well, if you keep debt payments super, super low, like 1%, well, all this credit is created and more people are going to buy goods and services, more loans, more mortgages, all this other stuff. Well, guess what? That's going to have an inflationary impact, more higher costs for goods and services. But what if the debt payments on that, the interests are really, really high, right? Well, oh my goodness, we're having a 14%, 15%, and guess what's going to happen? You're going to start spending less. So that's going to have deflationary pressures. Again, and just something to understand. What about globalization? Is that going to be inflationary, deflationary? Well, globalization is deflationary. Why? If I can have a manufacturing plant in China produce goods and services at a cheaper cost, well, guess what? That's going to bring down the price of televisions, of computers and stuff like that. Those are deflationary pressures. But guess what? After this COVID pandemic, where they started to realize, whoa, we can't have all of our supplies dependent on this one country, because guess what? If they decide to shut down due to a virus pandemic, we don't have any chips for our cars. We don't have any chips for our computers. Like this affects us. We don't have enough drugs, for our own population. So what's happening over the last couple of years? We're going to actually onshore manufacturing plants. In the U.S., Jim Rickards says that, based in Taiwan, they have factories that build, computer chips. Well, guess what? Those chips, they're actually now creating those plants in the United States, right? And so when you actually bring things onshore, manufacturing units, hire more people and stuff like that, guess what? That's going to have inflationary impact, right? Whether you have technology and productivity, if you have a lot of people and you're employing a lot of people, that could be inflationary, right? More income, more goods and services. But what if you have technology and you get computers, automation, AI? Well, guess what? You could, instead of having to pay all these people, now you can just have computers do it. And now, guess what? The cost of goods can actually reduce significantly. So now that's why technology and productivity will have an impact and be a deflationary effect. So, what about taxes? Well, if you are going to give tax cuts to people, well, what's the impact of that? Well, guess what? If I don't have to pay less in taxes, I'm going to use that money to invest, to buy a car, to buy goods and services, to go on vacation. I'm going to have more money to spend. But what if a government decides to increase taxes? We're going to charge more. You're going to have to pay much more in taxes. It's like, well, if I have to pay more to the government, well, guess what? I'm not going to start spending as much, right? That has deflationary. So aren't you starting to see that there's this pattern where this is why it's so difficult to understand a complex economy to predict whether we're going to have inflation or deflation because there's so many inputs that are affecting it. Whether if assets are going up or stock markets is going up, we call that the wealth effect. Ooh, my stock just went up, the S&P 500. I feel rich. I have all this more money. Guess what's going to happen? It's going to be inflationary pressures. I'm going to go on those vacations that I wanted to plan because I feel wealthy. So let's keep spending and buying. But what if the opposite is happening? What if you're in an environment and you don't feel wealthy? What if the stock market crashes? Oh my goodness! What if there's not a lot of jobs? Now we're going into psychology. What if people start to save money? Well, that means I'm not buying that car. So what does that car dealership have to do? They're going to have to start lowering prices of that car because no one's buying the car. They need to sell that inventory. Please sell this car. You won't buy it for 50,000. How about 45,000? How about 40,000? Deflationary pressures. People are not spending as much money, going back to velocity. So I could keep going over and over, but just for the sake of the training, I'm not going to show like hundreds of different slides, but here are some inflationary pressures. Government spending. This is another great financial economist, financial expert author is her name is Lynn Alden. She just wrote a book called Broken Money, and she basically is on the different investment channels saying, why isn't right now it's May 2024, the Fed has increased interest rates, but why isn't that we have reduced inflation? Like, why is inflation going down? Well, she says that it's because of fiscal policy. The government, with Biden's different inflation legislation that he passed to basically stimulate the economy, the green revolution, all whenever the government spends a lot of money, well, guess what? Now more people have more money in their pockets. There's more jobs, there's more things. That's going to create a lot of demand for buying in goods and services. That has a fiscal policy that increases inflation, you see. And so that's one of the factors, what she says, is why we still have inflation, even though the Fed is trying to combat inflation. If people have more money in their incomes, that can be inflationary. Supply chains can affect, whether if you have increased production cost, if your fuel costs more, right? If your computer chips cost more, guess what? That's going to cause inflation. If you have a natural disaster, oh my goodness, that can cause inflation. If you have a war, that's one of the things why we got out of the Depression, not only because of gold, which we're going to talk about, but also when FDR raised the price of gold so that he devalued the dollar, causing inflation. When the U.S. went to World War II, guess what? We had to start working all together to start building this war that had inflationary pressures. The opposite is if the government starts to just not spend money, decrease their spending. If there's a very fierce competition, if they can reduce the production costs, those are all deflationary. So again, these are all these factors. This is why the economy is so complex to actually make predictions. So now that you've kind of have this whole history of understanding the economy, money, what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to invest? Are we going to go through an inflationary times or deflationary times? Well, let's go what some of the experts say. Remember, we all started this training with what Ray Dalio, the founder of the largest hedge fund in the world. He wrote a book with Tony Robbins where he was interviewed in this book. This book came out in 2014, and every time I listen to a different experts on how to invest, the one word that keeps always coming back is diversification, diversification, diversification. And people say, well, I'm invested, I'm just going to diversify my stocks. No, 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 no. You have to have a diversification of different assets, right? So you have to have treasury bonds, then you have to have stocks, right? Even Ray Dalio says gold doesn't have much of a function, but it's an inflation hedge. If it's almost like insurance. You need to have some if the value of the currency is being devalued. You definitely want to have some gold. So even Ray Dalio acknowledges it. And commodities, wheat, electricity, gas, fuel, like all these different things, goods, those having a portion of that. So this was his diversified portfolio, again, based on this book of 2014. But as we start to discover, we get new and new information. So I'm just going to share with you just what Jim Rickards says. Jim Rickards also says you need to have a diversification of assets. Don't just be diversified in your stocks, be diversified in all the different asset classes. He's a big advocate for having gold and silver, not buying paper gold and silver, but actually owning the gold coins, right? Keeping them in a safe, or having a protected entity to hold on to those gold coins. And there's many reasons why he recommends that, but he never says, sell everything, go all to gold. But guess what he is saying? He's saying, you know what? We're going to continue to have inflation over time, just naturally, and gold and silver are store of value, especially gold. He says that you should have, just like Ray Dalio, treasury bills, right? Treasury bills are more short-term treasury bonds. Long-term are called treasury notes. But again, he kind of classifies them as cash and bonds. Like you need to own U.S. treasuries, both short-term and long-term, and just have cash. Jim Rickards is a big proponent of having cash. Why? Because when things get really low in price, his audience is really like older people who have a lot of capital and money to buy things. When prices are low, you buy them when they're cheap, so that eventually over a period of years they may increase in value. And when they're valued very high, you sell them and collect that money. So that's just how investors think. Having real estate, farmland, any kind of rent paying, real estate investment. Now, here's the first time I've heard of it, but Jim Rickards starting to point out that we need to start researching more a lot about private equity and alternative forms of investments. And I'm like, what are the alternative forms of investment? He says fine art. He also says technology and VCs, venture capital. So he was the first person. I'm like, what, venture capital? What's that? Then he also said public equities, natural resources, gold mining. But I want to go over like what does now, according to Tony Robbins and interviewing Ray Dalio and all these, because that was 2014, this almost 10 years later, what does he say? He says you still need to be diversified in your assets, but you should start using new categories of generating wealth. Private equity, venture capital, professional sports teams, private credit, energy revolution, private real estate. So I'm like, I don't really know what private equity and venture capital is. So I started to research it. I actually have the book right here. So I'm going to start reading it and learning about it. Maybe we might do a leadership library series book on it. You guys let me know whether you guys want us to do another whole topic on this, right? But private equity is where there are a bunch of companies that are not on the stock market, right? And you basically have these firms that help, invest into these private companies, and they help them, and in exchange they get money, they grow, and they have a higher rate of return, and it's been shown to have very high rates of return. But not everybody has access to private equity, and it's higher risk, higher fees, and lower liquidity, meaning if you're going to invest in a private equity firm, they're going to say you can't pull your money out for 5 years because we're investing this. And so that might scare some people, but guess what? If they're using that 5 year time frame to really build up that company, well, then guess what? Wait for those returns. Venture capital, that's more geared towards startups. There's so many different startups out there, but there are a lot of firms that really say, okay, you have a good idea, you have a good market, let's start investing in this. And we know that we can 10x, 20x this growth of this company, and we'll come up with all the money, but we're going to take a lot of that profit, right? So that's something that you can do. And so Tony Robbins in this book is starting to say that they're starting to pass legislation where more people can have access to private equity and venture capital, because right now there's like laws and limitations. So we'll see whether those legislations pass, as we move forward. But this is something that we need to discover as well. And so, how are we going to conclude this training? I wanted to say, what is the nuclear option, according to Jim Rickards, to be rescued if we have what is the worst case scenario, deflation, a depression-like event? So do you want to know what he says? Here's what he says. He says gold is the secret, the answer. In the worst case scenario, if we raise the price of gold like FDR did in 1930-33, remember, gold was our was our reserve currency, meaning all money was tied to gold, right? So I could put in $20 bill and I would get a gold coin, right? However, during the Depression, FDR changed that. He basically did the biggest inside job possible. He says, hey, everybody, we need all your gold. We'll give you $20 bills, $20 bills. Okay, give us all your gold, right? And guess what happened? After a period of time in 1933, he says, we're raising the price of gold from $20 to $35 an ounce. Well, guess what? That caused inflation, right? And so what Jim Rickards says in this video, I'll show you this little clip. He basically says that we could do that right now. If there's so much deflation, the velocity of money has slowed down. Well, we can increase the prices of everything. So let's check this short clip, right? 3357.
This clunky proof of work. And then
3357. Here we go.
got to get inflation. They've got zero interest rate policy, negative interest rate policy, QE, Operation Twist. So list all the ways they can kind of get inflation. The problem is, I call this Mick Jaggernomics. Mick Jagger saying you can't always get what you want. And it's true, just because central banks want inflation doesn't mean they can get it. Now, this is a bit technical, but just take that equation over on the right-hand side of the screen. MV equals PQ. M is the money supply, V is the velocity of the turnover. PQ together is nominal GDP broken into Q, which is real GDP, and P, which is a price index. That's all. It's a truism. You don't have to know really much more than that. So if velocity is constant and money supply goes up, then nominal GDP will go up. But if there's a structural limit of about 3% real growth, and everything over 3% has to be inflation. And that's how you get inflation. Well, down below, you see how the money supply went up from 800 billion to 4.2 trillion. But where's the inflation? We never got any inflation. Well, why not? If velocity is constant and money supply goes up, why isn't nominal GDP going up way, way faster than the structural boundary of 3% creating a lot of inflation? Well, the answer is velocity is not constant. Milton Friedman was wrong. And you see what's happening to velocity there. Velocity is crashing. So this is the problem the Fed has. But the Fed could have 150% inflation in 15 minutes. All they have to do is go into a room, close the door, take a vote, and decide that gold is $3,000 an ounce because they say so, and then come out and use your system open market account to maintain the price of gold. So what you do is you say, hey, you think gold's highly priced? We'll take it. Well, we're buyer 29.25, and you think gold is cheap? Come and get it. We'll sell it to you at 30.75. If you're a buyer at 29.25 and a seller at 30.75, guess what the price is? It's about $3,000 an ounce. In other words, you can use the gold at Fort Knox and use the printing press to maintain a two-way market in gold. And then you get your inflation. That $3,000 gold is almost 70% devaluation of the dollar. That's the right way to think about it. Nothing happens in a vacuum. This is when you get $100 oil, $50 silver, $6 copper, et cetera, et cetera. So the Fed can get inflation, but they might have to do it the same way they did in 1933, which is to revalue gold. And I make the point that gold always wins. In the greatest deflation in American history, 1927 to 1933, gold went up 70%. At the beginning of the Depression, gold was $20.67 an ounce. At the end of the Depression, it was $35 an ounce. Gold went up 70% in a world of 30% deflation. But when you have inflation, gold also wins. In between 1976 and 1981, the U.S. had 55% inflation, and gold went up 300% from $150 an ounce to $600 an ounce. So in other words, gold always wins. What it really does, it maintains its purchasing power through deflation and inflation one way or the other.
Interesting, right? I mean, this is why I appreciate Jim Rickards so
30%
much
deflate.
in terms of learning about these principles that I don't really get to hear from a lot of different people. So again, if you talk to economists like Steve Keen, right, who we've referenced, he's going to say, you know what? No, we cannot go back to a gold standard, and things like that. It's not a good exchange, a medium of exchange because people are not going to be buying stuff in gold coin. But it was Jim Rickards that basically says, if you have M0's money, gold is like M 0.01 in terms of money. It's the stability, it's the trust of the system. And we don't have time for this training to go into it, but he argues everything that economists, say about why gold doesn't work as part of, a gold standard cannot work. And he basically says, everyone says there's not enough gold, mining is too slow, it doesn't have a yield, it caused the Great Depression, it doesn't have an intrinsic value, it's obsolete. And then he goes through each one of those arguments and says that that is not true. Keynes never said gold was a barbarous relic. It was that the gold exchange standard that we have was a barbarous relic. And in fact, our founding fathers wanted us realized how dangerous it is when governments start creating fiat currencies and start printing up money, money, money. It has all these unintended negative consequences. And in the Constitution, it said that our money had to be tied to gold, a gold and silver standard, and we just went off that. So I don't know what the future holds. I think that it is possible that we could go back to a gold standard, but what people don't realize, they say, "Oh, that's deflationary." No, what Jim Rickards says, it's all about the price. Like right now, Jim Rickards says that gold could actually end up getting up to $10,000 an ounce. Like right now, it's around 2,000 something. And remember, this video was done in 2018. So that means it's now 2024, right? So again, it's something, buy it as insurance, right? That's the whole idea. Store your value knowing that the government is going to continue to inflate away the money and you're going to lose the value of the money. So I'll just end on this final note. What does gold say about in science? Gold is a very special, atomic number 79. It has these very special properties. It doesn't corrode. It's an excellent conductor of electricity, and it's very malleable. It could be hammered down, turned into like a foil, and everything has a lot of different uses. But also remember, this is all about developing conscious leaders. I love to even share, for those of you who are level 3 members, might be interested in the idea of non-scientific sources. And I'll agree, these are non-scientific sources, but in the kind of the spiritual realm, gold does actually have some very importance, right? If you're going to say that maybe humans are electromagnetic beings of energy, right? They say in some references, gold is purifying, it's balancing, it vitalizes energy for us, right? According to this in this book, Unveiled Mysteries by Godfrey Ray King, which I've read, and it basically said, how gold has all these different purposes, right? Means of exchange and ornamentation, but that's not really as important. It has this energy to purify, to vitalize, to balance the atomic structure of the world, right? And anytime that we're getting into a golden age, which some spiritual people say we're entering a golden age, right? Gold is going to be a lot more common. And any gold deposits and mountains, you find that that mountain has a lot of health and vigor. So again, just a fun little insight that I wanted to share with you. So let's kind of recap. How we're going to end this presentation is, what did we learn? So in part 2, this training, we learned that money must be money. Money must be money. It is a medium of exchange, it's a unit of account, and it's a store of value. And it has all these other factors: portable, durable, divisible, fungible, meaning interchangeable. But the most important thing, it's trust and confidence. Money is money because we think it's money, right? Fiat currency is just money that's based on a decree because we said so. And money is actually created in terms of credit. It's created by the banks by this term called fractional reserve lending or double entry bookkeeping. Jim Rickards was the only one that I really give some negative aspects about Bitcoin when I hear so many people talk about the success of Bitcoin. Well, Jim Rickards says, Bitcoin, that you have to think of it as casino chips, right? People go into a casino, they transfer their dollars into these chips so that they gamble hoping to get more money. But guess what? Can you buy anything with those chips? No, you just hope that they gain in value. And then the secret is to then get out of the casino and transfer that back into dollars so that you can use them in the general economy, right? And so that's what people don't understand about Bitcoin, is that's what it is. And so, for example, and he even has argued that governments have a vested interest in trying to attack Bitcoin, right? Because it's threat to our world reserve currency, like I said, all the different dangers about it. And guess what? I've only heard Jim Rickards talk about that bank scandal that we had, or not really bank scandal, the banking collapse that we had in 2023 of those different banks. he basically said that, again, this is a little conspiracy theory, but it was like, well, some of those banks, Silicon Valley Bank, did a lot of work with companies that dealt with these exchanges where you could exchange Bitcoin back to dollars. And so therefore, they can actually attack Bitcoin through the exchanges, right? Because whoever is transferring Bitcoin to dollars, that's a point of attack. So again, I haven't heard that anywhere else. I just thought I'd share it with you, but take that with a grain of salt. Economic theories, there's so many different out there, but we needed to focus on modern monetary theory. Yes, it's true. Government can print unlimited money, in this term credit. Governments can create unlimited debt, right? Because we can create our own money. That is true. But it's what Jim Rickards says, it's backed by confidence and trust, and it's been slowly declining. As a world reserve currency, less and less people are holding US Treasury bonds as that reserve currency. It was like at 1.70%. Now it's like down to 60%. And, there are going to be other forms where people are going to store their money because they don't trust that the US dollar is going to be a store of value. So, and especially because we're weaponizing it. And then we also talked about all the factors that affect inflation and deflation and prepare for the future, right? Demographics, the debt payments, globalization, technology, the psychology, the velocity of money, supply chain. This is why it's so hard to decrease inflation or to prevent a deflationary event. That's why it's so complex. And so how do we want to invest in this type of environment? You just have to prepare for all scenarios, whether we're having inflation or deflation, have a diversified portfolio, own physical gold, have some stocks, have bonds, US Treasury bonds, right? Real estate, commodities. And now the new areas I'm going to be researching a lot more in reading this book is about private equity and venture capital. And so if we ever had a depression-like event, don't worry. We could actually cause inflation just by raising the price of gold. And they are projections that gold could get up to $10,000 per ounce, in the next couple of years, whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, we don't know, but it's something to think about, right? And then gold has all these unique properties, right? Electromagnetic properties, and from non-scientific sources, they say that it's very purifying, balancing, and vitalizing energy force. So thank you so much for this training. I hope that you gained some value. I hope you learned a lot. I know it's a lot of information, but I really wanted to pack it in there because it's so important for us to learn about these concepts. And therefore, feel free to rewatch this video to really learn and absorb all these concepts. Feel free to, I'm going to include, in the notes below, all the different additional video resources, and I'll bold which ones I think are the most important. I'd love to get your feedback on this training. We're a couple minutes over, so if you do fill out the post assessment, remember, as soon as you hit submit, the thank you page will pop up and you can download the PowerPoint, a PDF of this entire presentation for you to check out. So does anybody have any questions or comments? Feel free to, raise your digital hand or post it in the chat. I'd really appreciate it. Any thoughts? Any questions? All right. I appreciate all of you. And for all of you who are watching this recording, I want you to have a great weekend. And I look forward to seeing you on the next training. Thank you for all the support of Electus Society. Let's continue our education so that we can actually survive in this new changing economy and be conscious leaders that really understand the economy, how it works, so that we can make a positive impact. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye, bye-bye. Thank you so much for watching this video clip about conscious leadership. If you are committed to helping to create more conscious leaders in this world, that is leaders with more humility, more integrity, more awareness, that take constructive action, then consider helping us by making a donation. Our goal is to have 600 conscious leaders develop before the end of this year. Currently, as of December 1st, we already have 400 members. And again, with your help, we can grow even further. How can you help us? Simply make a donation. If you visit buymeacoffee.com/Electus Society, you can either choose to give a monthly donation and join, and you get different access to a lot of these different membership benefits, or simply make a one-time donation. Click on the heart support button, choose 1, 3, 5, or type in any number of amount of coffees. Hit the support button and you can upload your card information on the secure platform. Thank you so much. I appreciate you, and let's continue our mission of building more leaders. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.